Thank you so much for having me, and it's really good to be with you. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to meditate in community. It always has a different quality to the experience when we come together, especially in times of need. I think this community began gathering during COVID in a different time of uncertainty and need. And I'm really glad to have it now. So thank you. So this week's Torah portion, I think, is just a wonderful, wonderful text for mining inspiration, for dealing with uncertainty and the unknown, and for dealing with our discomfort, the human propensity to feel a deep sense of discomfort when we do not know what is beyond the next boundary, what is beyond the next hill, what awaits us in the future. It's a famous story. It's a story of a liberated people who have been liberated from slavery and find themselves at the very edge of entering into the promised land. And scouts are being sent forward to bring back information. What will they find? And 12 scouts go out. 12 come back with catastrophic, fear-filled information, filled with insecurity and lack of self-confidence. And 2 come back with a sense of, you know what? We're not going to refute anything that's been said, but we can do it. It is indeed a place that has danger, but it is also a place of opportunity and potential and a place to move forward. In a way, this storyline is tragic. The people, the Israelites who receive this information, panic. They don't hear the positives. They only hear the catastrophic fear of the negatives. And they want to go back. They want to go back to Egypt. They would rather have the known of enslavement than the unknown of the future ahead of them. I feel so deeply connected to this story, and I feel like within my own interior experience, I experience it almost on a daily basis. Luckily, as an adult, I feel equipped with coping skills to manage when anxiety arises for me. I have had amazing teachers throughout my adult life who have given me some coping skills, have given me some practices to attend to the experience that one feels when in a state of panic and fear about the unknown that is ahead of us. One wonderful teacher, Rabbi Shefa Gold, taught me to really discern between the fear that is helpful, fear that can protect me, fear that can actually, potentially save my life, and fear that is based on fantasy, right? So there's a moment in which fear can tip over into unhelpful anxiety, unhelpful fantasy. And she actually taught me the acronym that fear might stand for to remind me of that kind of experience. Fear is fantasized experience acting as reality, right? So sometimes when I go inward and there's something that I'm feeling particularly anxious about, it is my challenge, the challenge of my practice to determine whether I'm catastrophizing, whether I am fantasizing and allowing that fantasy to act as reality, or if there is truth in what I am seeing. And so the challenge of our practice when we move to the interior of our experience is to determine, to discern on the regular basis. And it's a fluid, dynamic experience. To discern emet, truth of the moment. Am I safe in this moment? Am I also allowing for space and possibility of good outcomes? Am I also allowing myself the space and the possibility that I am actually equipped with every tool possible to meet the challenge of every unknown? Right? Am I giving myself the self-love and compassion that is required to stand strong with my core, to be courageous? So these are the practices that I have picked up along the way. And another teacher who's dear to my heart is Estelle Frankel. She is a psychologist, and her gift to the world is that she offers psychology through the lens of Jewish teaching, through the lens of Torah and Kabbalah. And she wrote a few years ago a book called The Wisdom of Not Knowing. It's a wonderful book that has been deeply helpful to me in coming closer to the possibility of not knowing, right? We live in a culture where we're expected to have answers all the time, where we're expected to be experts on lots of topics. I raise 3 teenagers. There's constant questions being thrown at me about the world that we live in, and being comfortable with not knowing, saying, I do not know. I do not have the answers, is a practice that I am committing to. So I invite you, taking into our practice these ideas of checking in with ourselves and offering ourselves the space and time to discern the quality of our fear, what is helpful, what is not helpful, the becoming comfortable with not knowing, and also coming into the last piece is coming into our identity as Ivrim. Right? The word Ivrim, I grew up in the former Soviet Union in Ukraine, speaking Russian. And in Russian, the word for Jew is Ivrei. Ivrim is a word that is deeply connected to my identity. I identify as an Ivri. And it is a word to describe Jews in the Torah, but it also has this connotation of those who cross boundaries. So Abraham and Sarah are Ivrim because they are willing to leave the known of their family life and to go into the unknown, to lech lecha, into the unknown, and they are called Ivrim. And so I invite us to come into the experience of our identity as Ivrim, as boundary crossers, as those who have courage to move into the unknown, to scout out the interiority of our experience and get comfortable with uncertainty. I invite you to place your feet on the earth beneath you, feeling the stability and the sense of being held and supported in this moment. And I also invite you to look behind you. Sometimes we feel like we're constantly being chased by our to-do lists, by danger. So just take a moment, physically turn your body, look around you, be certain that in this moment you are not being chased, that it is safe to settle down. It is safe to close your eyes if that feels comfortable to you. And find your anchor, your trusted anchor of support. Usually my trusted anchor is my breath. I stay with the in-breath and the out-breath. as a place to return to come back into the center, to come back home when my mind gets away from me. In this moment, I'm having trouble with my breath as I have an asthma flare, and I will be using sound as my trusted anchor. And I'm sharing this with you to offer that as a possibility anytime breath is not comfortable or available to you as an anchor for your practice. That sound, allowing for sound to reach your ears and returning to the sense of hearing each time the mind wanders is also a perfectly good practice. Bringing your awareness to the body, to the sensation of being here, hineni, right now. Sensation of being held and supported by the chair beneath you. Allowing for it to give you an embrace. Examining the interior as if you are sending scouts into the landscape of the soul. And noticing sensations, feelings that arise, thoughts that pass, allowing it all to be as it is. And giving yourself permission to feel all of the feelings. Noticing when there's truth and when there's fantasy that may be running away. And naming it as such. Sometimes fear is fantasized experience acting as reality. In this moment, what is true? In this moment, is there safety? In this moment, is there a possibility for expansion of the heart, softening, grounding? I will give you time for your own private practice, returning to the trusted anchor you choose today, whether it's breath or sound. Each time you feel distracted, not a problem. You can always find your way home. Notice where you are now and gently bring yourself back home into the present moment, into the body. As you come back into our shared space, I invite you to open your eyes whenever it feels appropriate. And before you come back into the shared space of the Zoom call, just look around and notice the quality of light around you, the quality of color. And as you come into presence of the material world, I just want to read an excerpt of a poem by Dorothy Walters, No Matter What You Know. Reality is always soft clay, ever shifting and changing its shape. Fire it into form, and the very moment you're hailing it as final truth, it will break in your hands. Thank you for practicing with me today.
Thank you so much, Marita, for that beautiful practice. Let's close, seal the practice as we do each day, offering an opportunity to those in mourning, observing yard site. If you're accustomed to joining the Kaddish to do so, you can put the name or names of those who are honoring today in the chat now or after we recite Kaddish. And those who are not reciting Kaddish, please stay present for those who are, to offer your compassion and support in your time of loss. And if you are reciting Kaddish, I invite you to join me by rising in body, mind, spirit. And you can unmute at this time. Git Gadal, Git Kadash, Shemei Rabbah, Bi'alma,
Israel, Bagala, Uvisman, Shmei Rabba, Mabaraki, Yitaraki, Ishtabaki, Parvi, Pramandi, Yitaleb, Yitalal,
Amen. Friends, thanks so much for joining us today. And if you're leaving us now, I hope you'll join us tomorrow for our practice led by Yael Shai. And I want to thank you for being here. As always, we thank Jordan Pollack for holding our tech space, and our teacher today, Marita Anderson, Chaplain Marita Anderson, for leading us again so beautifully today's practice. If you're leaving us now, we hope to see you soon. If not, you're welcome to stay with us, to continue to sit, use this time and space for your own practice. You can turn down the volume or off the volume off on your device, or join us for a conversation about today's teaching and practice. Bring Marita in here. Lot of appreciation, Marita. Thank you so much. It's always really just perfect, just a beautiful practice. And beautiful teaching. And it's such a fantastic story. It's the story of the spies. And you're bringing us into this teaching about embracing not knowing, the desire to know, acknowledging the desire to know, and the reality of not knowing, which that closing poem captures so well. We think we've got reality and we can fire it and fix it, and then it breaks or cracks or crumbles in the end. And that kind of ambiguity gets captured in the story, where their instruction to the scouts, right, is to get the information, just the facts. And then they start editorializing, saying, well, here are the facts. and here's our opinion about the facts, about whether they can do it or not. But there's even this ambiguity about whether they should be sent out, like whether this should have happened or needed to happen at all. So I wanted to, I guess what it brings up for me, and leads into the question for you, is how do we apply, so much of mindfulness practice is about staying in the here and now, in the present. And this Torah portion brings up a lot about our thinking about the future, right? And as you talked about, like fantasy, how fear in the moment gets fanned by fantasy into potential panic, and our desire to know what lays ahead. So that's acknowledged by, God giving permission for these spies to go. But there's also this question about, like, well, is God saying that the Midrash, I think, says, God says, well, if you need to send the spies, then okay, go ahead and do that. But there's also this sense of, be better if you didn't do that. Better, just stay in the present and stay with the not knowing and just keep moving forward. So my question for you, I'm just going to make sure everybody's muted here. Sorry, no, I'm going to mute everybody, and Marita, you might need to unmute yourself. Yeah, you need to unmute yourself to respond. So the question is, in terms of mindfulness practice, when our mind goes to the future, is it advisable, do you think, to kind of catch ourselves in that kind of future tripping and bring it back to the here and now and say, well, I don't know what the future's going to bring? Or is it okay to scout it out a little bit, to like engage in some planning or the like in some way? Like, how do we apply that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I feel like over the years of practice, and I probably wouldn't have been able to answer this question as a beginner, but over the years of practice, I have found that my practice is very dynamic, and it all depends on my intention for my sit. Sometimes when I go inward, it is so noisy in the interior landscape that all I can do is just stay with the noise and wait for it to settle and wait for my body to settle, right? And each time I practice, my intention, it's almost like I peek inside. I love this idea of like being a barometer for the weather pattern inside, like what's happening here today. So I guess in a way there is a scout, right? There's a scout that goes like, okay, what are we dealing with today? And actually, I'm going to use what Rabbi Shefa Gold taught me here again. I don't know why she's coming up so much today. Having a spiritual medicine cabinet of different practices that are appropriate for different experiences, right? So sometimes as I'm sitting, I know that my intention is to stay in the practice of almost like a Zen practice of, of attempting a more controlled experience. And sometimes I'm just really open, right? Like an open, spacious, open mind experience where I allow whatever arises to the surface to be welcome. And I give it almost like a caring, nurturing, attentive posture. So I think what's really important is to develop certain skills. And sometimes, by the way, like I mentioned it today, like I switch up my anchors. I suffer from asthma. Breath is not always available. So if I notice that I'm wheezing or I've just taken medicine and I'm a little bit, sometimes the medicine I take for asthma, it makes like gives me a little bit of heart palpitations. I change up my anchor, right? So my anchor changes so that I can stay in the trusted anchor experience, but not suffer from the reality of being in this physical body, right? So I guess to answer your question, over time, we really need to develop practices. I know I've worked with people who can't sit for long periods of time. And for them, maybe walking meditation or even dancing is more appropriate, right? So like movement of body or yoga.
Mhm.
And it's developing the self-awareness and the self-knowledge to know how to work with your own internal experience and what your intention is for that moment. And knowing, I had a really hard time discerning that as a beginner, because as a beginner, you're told like you're not even allowed to, scratch your face, because scratching your face is somehow it's not being settled enough, not being grounded enough, or like not responding to every external
Mhm.
um stimulus, right? Really staying grounded through even when there are external sounds, like we rarely find totally silent places. So I think it just takes time to develop self-awareness and self-knowledge to know how to stay true to your practice. Does that make sense?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm also thinking that I want to actually invite you to talk a little bit about, to the extent that you feel comfortable, about the function of awareness of intergenerational trauma
Mm-hmm.
and how that affects this, right? About recognizing it and how to address that skillfully when that does come up. Because I saw that it came up in the chat along with a lot of appreciation for today's practice. Um, I'm thinking about it in terms of applying the blessing of the story seems like to me that the instruction to the scouts was, yes, it's okay to have scouts as long as you're just looking in it, as long as it does involves releasing judgment about what you discern, which is not easy, right? But they get some data that is, can be alarming, and so they get alarmed, right? But we could get, for example, might want to know like what our prognosis is, right? If we have disease, what our prognosis is, um, um, and be able to be with that and that uncertainty. No, there's some degree of knowledge, but not certainty.
Mm-hmm.
And as a chaplain, I'm curious about that because you probably see this a lot, I imagine, where people get a prognosis, which they can say, "Oh my God, I have 6 months, right, a year, right?" And maybe not, right? One doesn't necessarily know. So I'm going to ask you to put on your chaplain hat for a minute here in terms of applying this. And of course, this is true whatever it could be, how we think about the election or
It's so applicable to so
anything, right?
many things. I know.
Right. So like,
I know.
so if I'm going to ask you to, if you could, like a case study here, we're sitting with somebody who's has a prognosis. And a prognosis is a prognosis, right? There's just the information.
Mhm.
Here's what we know. Here are the survival rates. Here are the, right? But each case is different. We don't know. Nobody knows what's going to happen,
Mhm.
right? So it seems to me that maybe this practice could be very applicable. It could be helpful in about holding uncertainty, even while knowing something. We have some data. Yeah. People read the polls and they like follow the
Yeah.
polls and like,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna, I feel like this could be like an hour conversation. I know we have just a few, but um let me just start with epigenetic trauma. In my family, it's very real. My family went from being a giant family in Ukraine to being decimated by World War II. And really, I grew up in a household of survivors.
Mhm.
And it's even hard for me to tease out what's epigenetic and what is storytelling, right? Like just storytelling of horrors that I was exposed to from a young age. So for me, it's been a lifelong, an act of courage has been a lifelong learning on how to discern what is the baggage that I came with and how to lighten the load for my children, right? Like I moved to this country when I was 11 years old, and I like we didn't bring any luggage, but I brought a luggage of trauma. And my goal has always been not to offer that for my children to carry it forward. So that's been in everything that I do as a chaplain, as a mindfulness practitioner, as a Rebbitzin, as a member of the Jewish community, is done with the acknowledgement of not wanting to lessen the load for the next generation. So that's, and that requires practices. That requires a lot of discernment and a lot of self-knowledge and knowing what's yours and what's not yours, right? Like what's true in this moment and what's memory.
Mhm.
And I think that fear can paralyze us. We can be absolutely paralyzed by fear. And one of the things that keeps me moving forward, right? Like the reason why I identify with that term ivri so much, because there are people who are constantly moving forward. Ivrim are moving forward. They're not staying in one place, and they're dynamic. They're a dynamic culture. And I want to embody that. I want to be a dynamic human being who's constantly moving forward and becoming, right? And fear can be absolutely paralyzing. Memory can be paralyzing. And, we want to Zahor, right? Like we want to remember, but we don't want to be caged by our past. So we want to imagine. And one of the things that's been really helpful for me is just vision making. Like, what is it that I envision as a possibility? What visions do I have for my family, for my community, for my people? And how can we, right now we're sort of in a culture where there's lack of vision. So I'm constantly, thinking about, dreaming about, writing poetry about vision of a different future.
Mhm.
And I think that is something to hold on to, right? A vision of opportunity and possibility of a different kind of place, which I think, is so deeply supported by our tradition, by the Hasidic tradition for sure. And then just in terms of chaplaincy, you mentioned, the reality of receiving oftentimes catastrophic news and how people process that and the discomfort that we feel, not just discomfort, the way in which we can be utterly shattered by not knowing, that sometimes there's a period of time between the time that we're told, okay, it could be like these 6 different diseases or these 6 different cancers or these 6 different tumors and the 6, and we have to do all these different tests and we'll get back to you in 6 weeks, and there you are, you're living your life not knowing, right? That can be really paralyzing too. The practice that I have personally is, even in moments where I know like I'm only human, right? Like I'm only human and I'm with people who are only human. And sometimes it's really hard to get out of the mindset of, panic. But there has to be, it's almost like, there were 12 scouts and 2 of them were
Right.
the ones who brought good news or brought positive news or news that wasn't tarnished by lack of self-confidence or like that ethos, that self-annihilation aspect of like we're nobody. We're making all kinds of assumptions about what they think of us. We look like grasshoppers. We must be no one. They must see us as nothing, right? We're zero. But leaving room for other possibilities, for possibilities of miracles, for possibility of prayer, for possibility of connection, for possibility of growth, right? Like it can't be an all-encompassing sense of panic. Like we need breadcrumbs to come back home to a center, to a place of groundedness.
Well, I guess you're right. We could be here for an hour at least. But that was beautiful and so much appreciation, Marita, I see in the chat. So of course, as always, we'd love to have you back to lead again. And just want to thank you for teaching message and practice and also for modeling really and sharing from your own history, your own story, and modeling for us exactly what you're teaching, meaning what you just said about breadcrumbs for possibility, for vision of youth, and we need that in every dimension so badly right now. So thank you so much for that. And I know you mentioned your family about to Israel for a trip, so wishing you a safe and meaningful trip and a good celebration of your family simcha there. And we'll hope to see you back soon.
Thank you. And thank you for holding this beautiful community together. We need each other. And so thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Thanks to Jordan for holding our space to get today. And we'll hope to see everyone tomorrow to practice with Yael Shai. Everyone be safe and be well.